Gosh, this is the first time I've done anything like this. So thank you for having me. Thank you for being here and letting me share just a small part of my story with you. I've chosen 3 different parts of my book to read from. The first is the introduction, just because it gives you a kind of a platform or a context, I guess, of where I came from. And then a little piece with my mom later on in the book. And then towards the end, I chose a small piece to read to you about, so you can kind of see a little bit of my progression and why I ended up deciding to escape and to run away from where I grew up. So I am going to be reading from the hardcover version of The Sound of Gravel, and I'll just go ahead and start, I guess. I am my mother's 4th child and my father's 39th. I grew up in Colonial LeBaron, a small town in the Mexican countryside, 200 miles south of El Paso, Texas. The colony, as we called it, was founded by my father's father, Almadier LeBaron, after God sent him a vision. In that vision, my grandfather was walking in the desert when he heard a voice that foretold of a place that would one day be populated with trees dripping with fruit, wonderful schools, beautiful churches, bountiful farms, and happy, faithful people. My grandfather had grown up in a fundamentalist Mormon family, and he always believed in the polygamous teachings of Joseph Smith. When the vision came to him, he knew he needed to move to Mexico and establish a community that would be a beacon of hope, an example of what comes from living righteously. My grandfather and grandmother LeBaron established the colony in 1944, and other polygamous families soon followed. Before long, the dry Mexican earth was cleared of mesquite and planted with orchards, pecan trees, and gardens. Cattle were brought in to be raised, and the town grew and flourished. My grandfather boldly predicted that someday people from all over the world would make pilgrimage to the town, and that the work being done there would be of the utmost importance to the realization of God's kingdom on earth. My grandfather died before I was born, but I entered childhood in the community that was his legacy. I took my first steps on the dirt roads that ran through the small farming community, tiny rocks and dry dirt getting stuck between my toes and piercing the soft soles of my feet. The trees my grandfather planted offered the shade that first cooled and protected my pale, freckled skin from the harsh desert sunlight. I ran through the peach orchards with my siblings, drank fresh milk from the cows on our dairy farm, and ate vegetables from the gardens my grandfather had first seen in the vision God had sent him. My family and I always tried our best to be the happy, faithful people God had promised would come to populate the colony. And during that time, actually, my mother's family was between 1950 and 1972 when I was born. Her family was from the United States and was converted by my father and his brother Ervil to come south of the border when my mom was 14 years old. And so we took many trips between the United States and Mexico, quite a bit, to El Paso and to Texas and to California. And so the next piece I chose is part of a bus ride home with my siblings and me and my mom. The road began to flatten out just as we reached the colony. LeBaron was too small to have its own bus station, so residents disembarked at a stop on the highway. As soon as my feet touched the gravel, the cold stung my face like a slap. By this point, the gloomy sky had given way to a starry night. Rainfall from earlier in the day made the air smell like moist dirt. A stiff breeze hit the back of my neck. I shivered as the driver opened the undercarriage door and we gathered our things. Matt threw the bag of gifts over his shoulder like a young Santa Claus. The bus pulled away and left behind nothing but darkness. The taillights became dots, the motor's hum faded in the distance, and suddenly all I could hear was the trickling of water through the irrigation ditches that ran the length of the colony. The rows of tall willow trees lining the ditches swayed in the breeze. The town was so quiet I could hear myself breathe. Mom looked up and down the highway, and I watched her expression melt from expectation to disappointment, to weariness, to acceptance. Lane obviously wasn't coming. He probably didn't get my messages, she mumbled with a sigh. It's no big deal. We can walk home. She balanced Aaron on her hip, threw her purse strap over her shoulder, bent over to pick up the suitcase, grabbed Audrey's hand, and prepared herself for the mile-long walk home. The rest of us followed silently, watching and listening as Mom took a wide step over the highway shoulder and onto the dirt road. The gravel crunching beneath her footsteps, the sound of home. As we walked past the adobe homes that led to the farm, I envied the bright and buttery glow emanating from the few that were wired for electricity. Interspersed among those warm, well-lit homes were houses where the light flickered and ghostly shadows bounced against every wall. These were the homes with kerosene lamps, homes like ours. But ours wouldn't even have flickering lights at the moment. It would be utterly dark, distinguishable only by Mom's broken down van parked outside. We reached the long gravel driveway leading to our house. I could hear the water flowing from the irrigation ditch, the small house standing cold and dark on the other side. The windows were so black, they gave me a feeling of emptiness. I dreaded going inside. Mom handed me Aaron, his wet diaper squishing against my waist. She and Matt pulled the gate open, and we all moved out of the way except Audrey, who just stood there bending her upper body forward and moaning with her fingers squeezed tightly together. On instinct, I moved some distance away, but when Mom walked back and patted Audrey softly on the back, the moaning stopped, and Audrey stepped out of the way of the gate. Mom was the first to jump over the ditch. She climbed onto a soggy dirt mound, lifted Aaron from my side, wrapped both her arms around him, and jumped. Aaron's head bounced and his hood fell off when Mom's feet landed safely on the other side. She wobbled a little, but righted herself to avoid falling backward into the mud. She looked back at us, her glasses perched on the end of her nose. Let Audrey go, Mom insisted. Go ahead and jump, sis, Mom told my sister in the kind, patient voice she always used to address Audrey. Audrey hunched her head forward, straightened her rigid legs, leapt, and landed smack in the middle of the ditch. The cold water reached all the way up to her knees. She moaned as Mom helped her out of the muck. The rest of us were well practiced, so we safely cleared the ditch and made our way to the house. The smell of wet alfalfa was strong as we walked around the microbus and approached the black wooden side door that led into our kitchen. It didn't have a real lock, just a long bent nail that hooked over the inside doorknob. Still, it kept the door closed and could be only opened from the inside. Matt had to climb through the one unlocked window into the kids' room at the back of the house. He yanked the window open, jumped inside, and soon we heard the nail twist away and the door opened. That was the late 1970s, about 1977. And what I'm going to read now is when I'm 15 years old, 10 years later, I guess, about 10 years later, when a lot happens between that time, but when I finally decided that the religion that I was born to was not right for me. All the words I'd ever heard in church and at all the conferences and Sunday school classes seemed to be taunting me now. Honor thy father, honor thy mother, be like Christ, be good, count your blessings, do what you're told, prophets, men, husbands, gods, visions, dreams, destruction, forgiveness, sacrifice, submission, faith, Babylon, heaven, and all the blessed little children. I realized that all those words that had held such power throughout my childhood, words that had characterized our way of life, words that had defined me, my siblings, our mom, they meant nothing to me. All the preaching, all the hours in church memorizing scriptures, How could that mean anything when the community supporting it wouldn't defend the innocence and safety of a child? With a certainty that took my breath away, I decided I had to get away from LeBaron, and I had to bring my siblings with me. I vowed that my siblings would not suffer the way that I had.